going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Crystal Hana Kim. How are you, Crystal?
I'm good. How are
Yeah,
you?
not doing too bad. For people who don't know, before the podcast started, Reba was acting a little naughty, so she
Yeah.
is not with us today, unfortunately. But Crystal did get to meet her. She's still
Yeah, she's pretty cute.
very cute, very cute. You don't have a puppy though. You're a recent mother, and I think you said you're
Yes.
hunkering in what used to be your office, but is now something else.
Yes, it's like part office, part nursery. So I was a little sad when I had to kind of give up my space, but the baby is worth it.
I imagine. Yeah, yeah. Is that your writing space? Is that where you do most of your writing before?
Yes, yeah. So this was when we moved into this apartment. I live in Brooklyn, and we moved in here 2019. It was the first time that I've ever had. We got an apartment with two bedrooms, right, for the first time, and so it was the first time that I had
Yeah.
a writing room. Because space is expensive in New York,
Mhm.
but it was always with the intention that it would turn into a baby room. So it's half and half now.
Okay. Cool. Are you the kind of writer? Do you always like to write in the same place, or do you give yourself the ability to write in a Starbucks as well?
I used to be more particular, like I would want to have a ritual. I liked, like lighting a candle. I liked having this space. But now that I have a baby, I've learned to be way more flexible because, especially, so the baby was born in the middle of the pandemic. So we didn't have help. And so it was just like me writing whenever he napped. And so I've learned to be a lot more flexible and I can write like basically anywhere now.
I mean, at this point, you kind of have to. We talk about it all the time. It's like, I live in SF. I'm writing,
Mhm.
I'm writing in between taking her out to the bathroom. I'm writing when I'm doing laundry. It
Yes.
might affect the writing. I don't know, but I'm still doing the writing. So how
Yeah.
did you start? Tell us a little bit about, where you're from and why you write about what you write about.
Yeah. Well, I've always been really interested in writing and reading, and I think that it's because so I was born in Queens and grew up in Long
So was
Island.
I.
Oh, nice. And then
Rego Park.
oh, nice. I was born in Flushing, where there were a lot of Koreans, and still are.
And a
But
lot of Jews.
yes, yes. It's so, I mean, I love Queens because it's
Yeah.
so diverse,
Probably the most. I mean, I moved 10 years ago, but I grew up in North Jersey. Probably the most diverse borough, I'd say,
I
or
think so.
part of New York's. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's like known as the most diverse borough, with like the most international community.
yeah.
Um, but I grew up there, right? And my parents are Korean immigrants, and my grandmother actually moved from Korea for 2 years to take care of me, and she didn't know anyone here besides my mom and my dad. So I grew up learning Korean first, and then so I was an ESL student in like kindergarten. And so I think I was always really fascinated with language because I was always kind of like, I remember like toggling between the two in my head and thinking that if I only knew a word in Korean, it only existed in Korean.
Interesting. Okay.
Because it's a kid, I was a kid and I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
felt like, okay, this doesn't exist for Americans because I don't know the language for it. So I was always like really loved writing even as a kid, and I wanted to be a writer at a young age, but I think everybody wants to be a writer and the president. Oh, not anymore, but there are like all these
Well,
dreams that
hopefully
people
soon
have.
that'll change. The
Yes,
president
yes,
thing. Yeah,
that's true.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. And so I was always really interested in writing. But when I went to college, I was an English major and I thought that I needed to do something more practical. Especially because
When did you
I,
go to college?
I started in 2005.
Okay, okay, yeah. So we're the exact same age. I'm 33. We're probably
Oh,
roughly the
nice.
same. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. It was interesting then, but that was
Yeah.
still kind of a time. Wasn't that long ago, but it was still kind of a time where you can like go to college to be a writer, and no one was even
Yeah.
really kind of questioning it yet, right? Right?
Yeah, yeah. So I was an English major because I thought that would might be a little safer. And also I think I had a lot of hesitations because I didn't, I think that there are a lot more diverse writers now. But back then, I really didn't see a lot of diversity, and I didn't know a lot of Asian American writers
Mhm.
or any, I think I read my first Asian American writer in college. So it just seemed like a harder task. And that I didn't understand what was a path to becoming a writer.
Mhm.
So I studied English, I took creative writing workshops, but I just kind of thought that that wasn't going to be a possibility for me. And so I was trying to figure out like, what else do I want to do? And I applied for Teach for America. And so that's what I actually did for a couple of years after graduating. But before graduating, like senior year, sitting on the steps, I had a conversation with a Korean American friend of mine, and I was telling her, like my secret dream is to be a writer, but I just don't think it's possible. And she was the one who kind of encouraged me and said, like, after Teach for America, if you still have that urge, I think you should give yourself like the permission to try it. Why not? We're young. And that really stuck with me. And so after Teach for America, after teaching for a couple of years and getting a graduate degree in teaching, I still wanted to write.
Uh,
So then I went to
you
graduate
bring
school
the
for
Teach
creative
for America.
writing.
You're going
Mhm.
to another country, right? To
No, it's
no.
actually
Okay,
it's
explain
here.
explain that. Explain that.
Yes. So Teach for America is an organization. It's still running. I think it's like probably changed a lot. But when I was in it, they place you in a community, so you don't get to choose. It could be anywhere in the United States,
Okay,
in a low socioeconomic community where you commit to teaching for 2 years at least.
got it.
So I ended up teaching in Brooklyn, so I stayed in New York.
Well, you lucked out then.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to stay in New
I
York.
mean, could you have ended up theoretically in Little Rock, Arkansas? I mean,
Yeah,
uh huh.
my friend ended up in Tulsa.
We love Little Rock. No, nothing against Little
Yes,
Rock.
and I mean, her rent was so cheap and she liked it there, but I wanted to stay in New York.
You ever
So
been to Tulsa, Oklahoma?
I never visited her.
Okay. Well, I mean, I toured in bands forever, and I mean, I've spent a lot of time in places that people forget are in America. And yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, it's for anyone. If you never traveled through America,
Yeah,
a lot of people talk about it, but they've never been there.
yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. It's an interesting place for sure.
yeah. I
Um,
need to go.
yeah. All right, cool. So, you do this program. You're staying in New
Hmm.
York this whole time.
Yeah.
What are you writing then? What are you doing? You're teaching. I mean, are you dating? What's going on in your life? How are you able to manage these things? What's going on?
Yeah. So I thought like, okay, I'll become a teacher and then I can write on the side. But the thing is, teaching is so exhausting. I was teaching first grade and then second grade,
Oh wow. Okay.
and it's really you need a lot of energy.
Oh yeah.
And I was at a
The
pretty
public school system.
yes.
Hmm.
So at that time in 2009, there was a teaching hiring freeze in the public school. So I was placed at a charter school, which is
Okay.
a public school. It's not private, but it's a little different. And it was just like a very intense atmosphere where it's very, there are just a lot of assessments that we're constantly doing for the students. It's very focused on literacy and growth, right? And I really loved my students, but it was just a lot of work all the time. And I was also doing grad school for teaching at the same time, which was on the weekends and evenings.
That's
So
a lot.
I quickly just realized that I wasn't able to write the way that I wanted to. And I took some creative writing classes at the YMCA during the summers.
Oh, cool.
But
I didn't even
besides
know they
that,
offered those classes. That's cool.
yeah. But besides that, I didn't get as much writing in as I wanted, which is why after my TFA commitment, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna just give myself the time by applying to grad school, and if I get in, I'll try it.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you said you got in.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
ended up going to Columbia grad school, and I started writing short stories there because it's just easier to
Uh huh.
workshop short stories, and it felt less intimidating to
Uh
me.
huh.
Uh, and instead of committing to a whole novel, which takes so much time and effort, it just felt more daunting,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Well, had you ever attempted a short story before? I mean, I tried writing short stories in the beginning, and I found it to be very, very. I mean, I'm a fairly new writer. Yeah, I've only been writing, for the last
Mm-hmm.
3-ish years, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, let me start with short stories. And it kicked my fucking ass. I mean, like,
Yes.
it kicks your ass, short stories.
Yeah. So actually, I think I was incorrect in my assumption going in. I just thought like the
Yeah.
short story form would be easier, but it's
Nah.
so much harder. I actually find short stories incredibly hard,
Yeah.
and I don't write them much anymore. I think they're so hard. They're
Mhm.
just hard in different ways.
Yeah.
But when I went in, I thought incorrectly that it would be an easier form. And I had been writing short stories beforehand. So that's what I started writing. But pretty like quickly, I kind of realized that I was interested in a family and I was interested in all these like Korean and Korean American characters. So I would say like 1 or 2 semesters in, I decided, okay, I'm writing a novel and stories, like an interconnected short story collection. Um, and it was very different from my novel If You Leave Me that I actually eventually published, but there were some core characters that were the same. But it
Uh,
was 3 generations, it was many more years, and it started in Korea during the Korean War, but then ended in America in like 2010s. So it was very different, whereas my novel right now is If You Leave Me is just taking place in Korea, and it's 16 years starting during the war and into the aftermath. But I started writing some of the characters in grad school.
a couple of questions. Well, first off, growing up, did your family travel back to Korea when you were growing up?
Yeah, yeah. So my mom is the only one of her family that's here in America.
Okay,
So
okay.
she has 4 sisters, and I'm very close to my grandmother. So we would go back basically every summer or every other summer when I was
Awesome.
little, because she, missed her family, and
Oh yeah.
it was really important for my parents that my sister and I speak Korean and know the culture,
Hmm.
and so we went back often, and then it was harder when I was in high school, middle school, but we still went back pretty often,
Yeah.
so I had a lot of
Yeah.
familiarity.
It's like my mother when I was a kid, would bring us into Williamsburg and be like, "These are Jewish people." Uh,
Yeah.
um,
Hilarious.
not anymore, but they used to be.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the next question is why? Well, obviously with Korea, for
Hmm.
anyone who's ever turned on the television ever, Korea's broken up into North Korea and South Korea.
Yes,
And there was a war, which obviously you said you
yes,
started writing about. I
yes.
am a history fanatic. I try to read as many books as I can about all the wars, the
Same.
driest things you could possibly read.
Uh-huh.
But the Korean War is the one war I can't say I know enough about. And we said before the
Right.
podcast, I was supposed to I was going to be going to I've been to Asia a couple of times, but I was going to be going to
Mhm.
Korea for my first time. Um,
Mhm.
Obviously that didn't happen. The world shut down. I was
Yeah.
going to I was going to start in Tokyo, take the train to Hiroshima. I needed to see the monument where the bomb went off.
Mhm.
I had to, and then I was going to fly. I had the whole thing, fly there to Korea. Um,
Ah,
why,
too
so
bad.
did you have any family connection to the war itself? Why the war?
Yeah, so I think that, you kind of touched upon it earlier when you said that you are a history fanatic, but you don't know that much about the Korean War.
Yes.
And what I basically realized is that it's called the Forgotten War in
Yes.
America because it's really something that we don't talk about. It's not part of our like American cultural historical consciousness.
And not to cut you off, but
Hmm.
again, for people who don't realize or remember, the Korean War happened 6 years after World War II. I
Yes,
mean, a little,
1950.
not even a decade later, we were in
Yeah.
another war.
Yes. And I remember, growing up, I mean, I grew up here, right? And in history textbooks, we learned so much about World War II and the Vietnam War, but the Korean War happened in between. And it's like a paragraph,
Hmm.
right, in the
Hmm.
textbook. So it was something that I thought was really fascinating because all of Korea was involved in the in the war in some way, right? And the American troops were involved. And like I said earlier, I'm very close to my maternal grandmother, and she was a young teen during the war,
Hmm.
and she would tell me stories. She's a storyteller. She loves talking, and she would tell me stories of how she and her mother had to flee, and civilians were fleeing on foot, right? And she drew such a very visual picture for me of the hardships there, and there was such a striking contrast between what I was learning about the Korean War from my family in my private home versus what I was learning about it in public in school, because there was just
Mm-hmm.
nothing that I was really learning. So I thought that this would be something that I could perhaps write about, because I wanted to share these experiences with a wider audience, and I was just personally very interested in it because of my family's background in it. And then at the same time, I really am interested in war narratives, but what I realized was that they're often focused on men,
Uh-huh.
right? The soldiers or like the generals or whatnot. And I really thought, well, what happens to the women who are at home? Like, what do their traumas look like? Because they're in, they are irrevocably, I don't know how to say that
You
word,
saved
but
yourself. It was good. That was good. That was good. I would have butchered
they
it. Don't worry.
they're irrevocably changed by the war as well, but we don't really get to see their experiences. So I wanted to have a woman and her experiences and her traumas center the novel too.
Yeah. Immediately comes to mind and I agree with you when you're saying, especially with the war narrative, it's
Mhm.
rare that you have a female. But immediately came to mind. I don't know if you read it. All the light we cannot see. And I
Mhm.
mean that he did a very good job of splitting it in half.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
really got and it's interesting you
I
say that.
love that
Oh,
book.
I mean, come on. I mean, that was just.
Love him.
I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. But
I love, yeah.
it's interesting you say that. I mean, I'm a white straight male, right? So I am public enemy number one. So at this point, I am hyper aware of the authors out there, the media, what's going on, and I'm trying to pay attention to it. So specifically, I don't know if you had a chance to watch. It's my newest obsession. I just finished The Crown. Have you seen The Crown?
I have not.
Okay.
I know a lot of people are into it, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I watched one episode and then it was very slow. And I know that Americans, I mean, I'm an American, but I know that Americans like have this obsession with British royalty, but I never got on that train, so I haven't seen it. But I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, well, maybe my obsession with British royalty has just begun because I
Mhm.
just. But that said, it's a show that, again, as a straight dude, right?
Mhm.
It's female driven. The whole plot, the main
Mm.
characters are female. All the male characters are always secondary, but they
Nice.
were able, for me, and again, it's dope because
Mhm.
it was so good that I I mean, I listened to Joe Rogan, I lift weight, I am the last, and they dragged me in because the dialogue, the
Yeah.
everything. So the
Mhm.
idea of female driven characters can
Mhm.
still bring in male audiences.
Yeah, of course.
It's not, it shouldn't be just because you're writing a female character, it should only be tailored to a female audience. I think,
Yeah.
and I only brought up The Crown because they did a superb job of doing that in their art.
I didn't realize, yeah, I didn't realize it was female driven. That's very
Oh,
interesting.
definitely, yeah, and it's very slow. If you ever watch, I compare it to Mad Men. If you ever saw Mad Men,
Yeah, I didn't watch
it's
that
kind of like
either.
that slow, steady drip of just like
Yeah.
it's not The Sopranos, which on this show we all know is the greatest show ever made.
I also
But
haven't seen that. I have like all these gaps in my TV knowledge. I know. I know. I
The
know.
Sopranos. Well, all right. Well, I'm going to spare everyone. Yeah, it was filmed in my backyard. It's the
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
Northern Jersey. It was the greatest show
Hmm.
ever made.
Hmm.
All right, but we're not talking about Sopranos. So you had this idea for the book. Um,
Yeah.
did you do a lot of research for it? I mean, did
Oh,
you go?
yeah.
Yeah. Where did your research take you?
Yes, I had to do so much research. And you know what? I feel like with the first book, when you are quote unquote like new writer, even though I feel like a new
Tough
writer
one.
still, yeah, like, but I feel like I still feel like new writer,
Yeah.
Uh, but I think with the first book, there's kind of this naivety, which is really special. And so I just thought like, I'm gonna write this book. I'm gonna write about the Korean War from a female perspective. It's like a big endeavor, but I was
Any
young and I just
any
felt excited.
fictional books from that the Korean? I can't even think of any.
There are some, there's
Okay.
Chang Lee's The Surrendered, but there's not a ton about the Korean War, which is
Yeah.
also one of the reasons why I wanted to write about it.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't even realize how much research would be involved. I didn't realize how long it would take, but I did a lot of oral history research in the sense that I talked to my grandmother and then also my aunts and so my dad is one of 9 siblings and he's on the younger end. So some of my paternal aunts are the same age as my grandma. It's a little
Okay.
like
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I talked to my grandmother, but also my aunts, my elderly aunts, and just heard about their experiences. And I was really interested in that female specific experience of like, what did you do to make money? Like, what was it like to be so hungry? Like paint me a picture. And then I read a lot about the Korean War. I read memoirs of soldiers' experiences as well, Korean soldiers' experiences, because the novel actually, though it centers around Hemi, this Korean girl, there are 5 narrators, and 3 of them are men. There are 2 men that are kind of like vying for her attention, and then there's her younger brother. So I wanted to get a sense of like what was a soldier's experience,
Mhm.
and then I realized that there's not a lot of material about the Korean, like a Korean woman's experience, right? Which is kind of why I started writing this book in the first place. But it was frustrating because I couldn't get that material. So it actually ended up broadening my research in the sense that I started reading articles about post traumatic stress disorder or the way that Koreans talk about depression or the language around depression. And I started reading other novels that I could find that were not based in Korea, but were focused on the domestic or the female experience in a war narrative, right? And I watched films, so it was very kind of wide and diverse type of research that I
Um,
did.
how is, I mean, how is depression viewed in the Korean community? I mean, in the Jewish community, it's just called anxiety. What do you, especially with age, can you talk about that? When was that easy to
Yeah,
get into?
yeah, it was. I mean, even now, I think things are changing. I was talking to a cousin of mine, and the way that people are talking about it is changing. I think therapy is being seen as more of a socially accepted kind
Uh,
of thing to do. But in the 1950s, it was not something that people talked about. Like probably not even here. I'm not sure about here, but in Korea, definitely not. Right?
electric shock therapy.
Yeah, you just in Korea, you saw this devastation, you saw death, you experienced it, and you just move on. So I was really interested in my character Hemi showing, and the other characters, like showing what does that look like when you can't process the grief or the trauma that you've seen. How does that come out? And it can come out in like abusive behavior, it can come out in Hemi experiences some um, postpartum depression, but they're not talking about it, right? And she at one point tries to explain how she's feeling, and everyone around her kind of shuts her down. So I wanted to show the ways in which it's really dangerous at that time when there's no language, there's no term
Hmm.
depression, right?
Hmm.
And so when you don't have the language to name something, then how are you able to share that experience or get help?
Funny, I'm just laughing. It's the opposite of what you said earlier in the podcast, where you were a kid and you were learning Korean and you thought,
Yeah.
right? And now it's the opposite.
Yes.
The English words they don't have it in Korean.
Mhm,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mhm.
No, I mean it's unbelievable. I'm only gonna mention because I just read the book and you said your father's one of 9.
Yeah.
That book, Hidden Valley Road. I don't
Oh,
know.
I've heard of it. I
Oh,
have not read it, but I've heard of it.
it
It
is.
sounds very interesting.
It is effed. I mean, it is fucked up.
Yeah.
Very,
It sounds
very
so
disturbing.
dark. Yeah.
Very, but in the sense of you see these big. I mean, I didn't grow up in a big
Yeah.
family. I don't,
Mhm.
but to have 12 children, and I mean,
Ah.
but it explains schizophrenia. It explains
Mhm.
depression, the genetic codes. I mean, it is mind blowing, that book.
Oh.
Yeah, I would check it out only because you have your father's one of. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So when you started, clicking away and getting the drafts going? what again, were you working full time? You were teaching at that time.
Mhm.
How long did it kind of take you to get the novel into a form where you're like, okay, now I can?
Yeah. Yeah, so I started writing about like Korean mothers and daughters in undergrad.
Uh,
And then that kind of sparked my interest in exploring that part of the narrative. And then when I was teaching, I didn't get to write as much, but once I went to grad school, I stopped teaching.
yeah.
So I was just a full-time student for 2 years. Well, I was doing some part-time teaching work, but mostly a student. And I was working on this interconnected short story collection. And I thought that I would just have a short story collection first. And it was actually in my last workshop in, what was that, 2014, that my teacher, Ben Metcalf, said, this is a novel. You need to get rid of like 2/3 of your book and focus on these characters. And it was, I had like two strong reactions to it. One of it was like devastation because I was just like, what the fuck? I've been working on this novel. I've been working on my short story collection for 3 years.
Yeah.
And now in my last workshop, I'm about to leave and you tell me that it's a novel. But at the same time, it, like, him saying that clicked for me. And I realized that he's right. Like, I have a story here that I could really delve into.
Yeah.
So after I got over my like devastation, I pretty quickly decided to try out the novel form. So that required me to kind of completely break open the short story collection, get rid of 2/3 of it, look at the parts that were focused on my characters, who Hemi, Jisoo, Kyungwon, and then kind of spread that out. So I say that I started the novel in 2011, which is when I started the grad program, because that's when I first met these characters. But then the novel started taking shape in 2014. And then I sold it in 2016. And then it came out in 2018.
And how was that process for you? I mean, were you working with? Did you know any agents beforehand? How did you kind of get it into the hands of an agent?
Yeah. So in grad school, or at least my grad school, was very focused on the process. And they often said, like, don't worry about the business aspect of it until later, which I know is frustrating for a lot of people. But I just listened to that,
Yeah.
because I was really focused on my novel and I'm a slow writer. So
Are you?
I think so.
Uh-huh. Well,
I think
are
so.
you comparing it to other people?
No, it's just I feel like I'm
Okay,
slow.
fair enough.
I feel like I'm
Yeah, yeah.
slow because I'm not somebody who works on multiple projects. So I feel like I'm in this one project
Yeah.
forever kind of feeling. So I didn't have an agent, and I didn't really know agents beforehand, but I was going to conferences and meeting people, right? And, like saving their cards. And then once I was done, well, after graduate school, I was working and writing at the same time. And once I was finally done, then I started querying agents. So I didn't
Uh,
have an agent beforehand.
uh-huh. Uh-huh. And so once I mean, was that kind of a shocking process to you, or was it all pretty smooth, seamless once it kind of got out there and it was out of your hands?
Yeah, I mean, writers are. I think I always describe writers as extremely sensitive, but also have this kind of like egotism to them, right? Because you're so like I'm so sensitive. I'll just talk about myself. I'm so sensitive, but also in order to decide I'm going to work on a project for years, right? In the hopes that it is becomes a book, that requires like an egotism,
Mhm.
right? And a belief in yourself.
Yeah, you nailed it.
So yeah, so the agent querying process took a couple of months, and I definitely got rejections. So it was
We
very like
we love
emotional
rejections here.
process. Yeah, it was definitely emotional because I mean, no one likes getting rejected, right?
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, cool. And then so then then it's out there. It's boom. Once it
Mhm.
kind of once it's in the mechanics of the publishing world, what are your thoughts then? Are you immediately working on the next thing? I mean, how do you go about your next whatever?
Yeah, yeah. So I sold it in 2016
Yeah.
and we were done. We had galleys by 2017, but it didn't come out until like a year later.
Are
I
you
don't exactly
frustrated
remember
with that
why.
process or that length of time for how long books take to get out into the world?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I felt like my experience was long,
Yeah.
but I think it was because they're trying to be strategic about it,
Uh-huh.
right? Because originally, I was done and I had galleys in late 2017, and it was originally going to be a summer 2018 book, like June. But then they decided, okay, this is a little too dark to be a beachy, like people are not going to want to read this on the beach because it's
Interesting.
depressing.
Yeah.
So let's move it to August.
Well, I want to stop you there because you said in graduate school they told you the exact opposite. They said worry about the writing, don't worry about the business.
Yeah.
But how does that prepare you for when you have to deal with
Right.
the business?
Right. So I think I naively just went along with that and was really focused on the craft. And there are benefits to that because I think that I didn't get caught up in the like business and competition aspect of it.
Which could have, I
Right.
mean, that could have fucked up your writing.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that I was kind of sheltered from that because I just wasn't paying attention to that world, which was good. But then afterwards, then you have to like scramble to figure out like how do I get an agent, how
Yeah.
does this work, what does publishing look like. But I was really lucky that I have an amazing agent that I really trust, amazing editor and publicist, and we're all friends now, so I felt really good about the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I don't know. I think I was talking about before the podcast, but you came onto my radar because when your book came out, you kind of popped with the whole, it was like a crew of yours,
Mm.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
I was following. I mean, we're based the podcast, it's an SF podcast. I know you're
Mm-hmm.
doing some things with Green Apple Books.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seemed like are you? Can you explain to people your little clique? I mean, maybe I'm making something up, but it seemed like
Yeah.
friends and you guys were all releasing books at the same time. Some other Korean
Yes.
American authors too.
Yes, yeah. So there was a little group of us. And I did an event with Aro Kwan, who wrote The Incendiaries, Ingrid Roja Contreras, who wrote The Fruit of the Drunken Tree, Vanessa Hua,
Yeah, I'm
who,
making this up. Yeah,
yes, right. So all of them are SF writers, right?
exactly.
So
Because none of them have been on the podcast. I'm trying to get Oro. Hopefully, she'll come on.
yeah. So they're all SF writers. So I feel like SF has such a like awesome, closely knit group of writers. You know, it has a strong
Well,
community.
yeah. As someone who grew up in Jersey, New York City, and having lived in
Mm-hmm.
SF now for a decade,
Mm-hmm.
this city to me is still. I live in Haight Ashbury. I'm looking at Golden Gate Park. I mean, this city to me is still it's one of the most magical cities in the
Yeah.
world to me. I've traveled everywhere. I've been everywhere, and to this day, yeah, SF has a. If we can just, we're desperately always just trying to keep it that way. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I wasn't that familiar with it beforehand, but
Yeah.
you guys have a great community
Love it
there.
here. Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone here
it's
is
awesome.
everyone's so stoked on people just doing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like there's like no sense of competition, or it just felt like a close knit group because it's like a smaller in terms of location or physical space.
Well, let me ask you this question then: is there a thing in
Mm-hmm.
New York? Is there a vibe in New York of a competitive vibe? You can be
Um,
honest. You don't have to name names.
I feel like there is, just because the publishing houses are here, the agents are
All
here,
there.
where it feels very like businessy,
Uh huh.
right? It can feel kind of like that. And there are so many writers. You know, when there's like a surplus of writers, it can kind of feel like it's harder to create a community because
Of
there's so
course.
many. So I think that New York kind of suffers from that sometimes.
Hmm.
Though I feel like I've met so many incredible writers after my book was published because we kind of found each other along the way. Like, oh,
Yeah.
your book is publishing too. Let's support each other
Yeah.
because this is like a
Why
scary
not?
new process. Yeah.
Yeah, because
And it's nicer to support.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're pushing other authors that are maybe again either other female Korean American authors,
Hmm.
whoever, if those readers are going to like her book, they might like your
Yeah.
book too. So why wouldn't you try to push everyone up?
Yes. And I feel like people can think that the literary world is very competitive and cutthroat. And I just want to push against that. And I would rather have friends and support their books than feel like jealous, you
Exactly.
know? And so the more you support your friends and the more you are excited for them, like the better it feels to be part of this world,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
I try very hard in my own personal life. Jealousy is something I've always tried to, I grew up in touring bands, and whenever I saw bands that were
Uh,
getting bigger shows or playing, the Fillmore, whoever,
mhm.
whatever, the jealousy within me was just, it wasn't it didn't seethe, but it can get to you, and then it can
Oh,
affect
yeah.
your own art directly. And then when that happens, it's over. It's game over.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's easy to think that there's only a number of slices in the pie or whatever that phrase is,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And it's not like that.
Not at
So,
all.
yeah, I feel like the more I support, the less I'll feel
Yeah.
jealous.
I mean, David Hasselhoff is huge in Germany, right? I mean, like the whole world, like, I mean, just because, it's not just because you write one book, only people in, you know,
Yeah,
Germany read it. It's a whole big world.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So that's great. So this book comes out. You went on a little tour. Did you do any tour dates,
Hmm.
readings and stuff?
Yeah, yeah, I did
Was that your first
events.
time doing any readings?
Let's see, I'm trying to think. I think I had done like one or two beforehand at
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
residencies or conferences,
yeah,
but I didn't enjoy them.
yeah,
And then once this book came out, I had to like really like gird up
yeah,
and get,
yeah,
get myself ready to present. But also at that point, I had been teaching. I was used to being like in a performative
yeah,
kind of role. So I really like
yeah.
readings now, and
That
I find a lot of joy in them.
Yeah, that's dope. Well, Crystal, I mean, this has been an absolute blast.
This
I
is so
always,
fun.
yeah, no, most definitely. I always ask kind of a couple of quick questions at the end.
Yeah.
Obviously, we were saying before you are on social media.
Hmm.
Please do let the people know what you do, where you are, and how to find you.
Yes. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Crystal Hana K.
Great. Second question: Are we expecting another book from you? Are you working on anything right now?
Yes, I'm working on
Great.
my second novel. I
Yeah.
started in 2017, but I'm still going. So there's no date yet,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm working on something. Yeah.
We love it. And since you're a New York gal, what
Hmm.
bookstores you repping? Where should people buy your book?
Oh yeah, I love Books Are Magic. It's like I don't live in that neighborhood now, but I love them. They were my neighborhood bookstore a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Love them. Love Powerhouse Arena.
That's a new one. Power. I don't know that one.
Oh yeah, they're in Dumbo. They've been
Oh,
around
okay.
for a while. Yeah, but they're great too.
Cool. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much again, Crystal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone, please get the book. Tell the people what's the name of the book. Buy it. Buy it.
Yes, the novel is called If You Leave Me
We love it,
by
Crystal.
Crystal Hana Kim.
We love it, Crystal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This
Yeah.
is a
Enjoy
lot
the
of
rest of
fun.
your day.
All right, I'm going to watch The Sopranos.
And you're gonna email, and we're gonna talk. I'm gonna message you, and we're gonna go season by season. And I'm gonna
Yes.
explain the whole breakdown. I'm telling you right now, you won't regret it, Crystal.
I know. I've heard it's good.
All right. We love it. See you
All
later.
right.